The Galactic Council watched the battle, and suddenly fell silent. The screen showed 2,300 red marks. My fleet had 57 blue ones. I had been looking at those numbers for 40 minutes, not because I needed more time to understand them, but because I was running calculations on something. The flat numbers did not show response lag, formation adjustment time, the particular cost of forcing a large, organized fleet to pay attention to 11 different problems at once instead of 1. The Galactic Council's observation relay blinked green at the corner of my display. They had been live for 2 hours. 47 member species watching humanity's first full interstellar engagement, broadcasting across their various sensory feed formats: crystalline, bioluminescent, electromagnetic, chemical signal arrays, whatever biology required to receive the transmission. They had formally described this as educational content. I had approved relay access without argument. I did not have a reason to refuse, and I thought it would be useful for them to see. My name is Marin Voss. I am 41 years old. I have gray at my temples that arrived sometime during my third interstellar posting, and I have a habit of running the arithmetic on any situation before most people in the room have finished identifying the situation. Those two things are connected. Lieutenant Owen Price set a coffee mug at the edge of my console and said nothing. He had been my operations officer for 3 years, which meant he understood when conversation added value and when it did not. He was very good at knowing the difference. All units report ready, he said, because that was relevant. Confirmed. On the screen, the 2,300 red marks continued their advance. The Kreth fleet, they moved in a cascade formation, a tactical arrangement the Council database described as the most consistently effective large-scale combat configuration in recorded interstellar history. 800 years of refinement. 43 prior civilizations had encountered it. 31 had surrendered in the opening phase. 12 had not been in a position to surrender. 0 had won. I had been informed of that statistic several times in the 3 weeks leading to this day. I acknowledged it each time because it was accurate, and disputing accuracy is a waste of energy. But 0 is a number that describes the past. The past is not the same thing as the future. This distinction gets lost when people are frightened. I was not frightened. I was busy. My communications officer, Nina Cole, turned from her console. She was 26 years old, precise, the kind of focus. That meant she had already checked everything twice before bringing it forward. Council relay is confirmed active on all 47 frequencies, Admiral. Good. She hesitated. There are 43 warship classifications in the Kreth formation that are not in our database. New designs, we have never seen them before. Write it down for tactical analysis. For the Council briefing afterward, they will want to know what they were looking at. She thought about that briefly, then wrote it down. Price had the formation breakdown on the secondary screen. I had divided my 57 ships into 11 groups. The Council's tactical AI had filed an advisory flag within 30 minutes of the plan submission. Several groups had only 5 ships. 5 ships was not a tactically meaningful unit by any galactic military doctrine. It fell below every threshold. in the database for viable combat. Effectiveness. By my specific calculation, it was exactly enough to be a sustained problem. I had given each group a name, not numbers. Numbers were for plans that expected clean outcomes and clean reports afterward. Names were for things you intended to remember. Whiskey Group, Hammer Group, Bolt, Ridge, Cairn, Flint, Arrow, Spur, Tide, Copper, and the group I commanded personally, which I had named Tuesday, because Tuesday was my least favorite day of the week, and I had never once found a way to get around one. Priced, I said. Right here. Walk me through what they expect. He already had it ready. He always did. Standard defensive line, hold initial contact, demonstrate resistance, then fall back in stages toward the secondary jump corridor. That is the established response pattern for a fleet at this numerical disadvantage. The Kreth have seen it 31 times, so their formation is already calibrated for a retreating target. The Cascade is designed specifically to process a retreating opponent. Every sector is positioned for pursuit angles. Good. I looked at the 57 blue marks on the screen. I knew the names of most of the ships. I knew the commanding officers personally. Some of them I had worked with for years. All of them had looked at these same numbers and had come here anyway. That told me everything I needed to know about what kind of people they were, then are not giving them what they are calibrated for. Owen looked at the screen, then back at me. What are we giving them? 11 simultaneous problems, all of them too small to justify a full formation response, none of them ignorable. He ran the arithmetic. I watched his expression move through it, not the winning arithmetic which he already understood as well as I did, the other arithmetic, the math about attention, costs and response windows, and what happens when a large disciplined formation is forced to look in 11 directions simultaneously when its entire architecture is built for one. It will cost us, he said. Yes. Significantly. Yes. He did not say anything else. He understood this was not a conversation about cost. It was a conversation about what the cost produced. I opened the fleet-wide channel. This is Voss. You have your orders. You know your assignments. Do not look at their numbers. Look at your heading and do your job. I stopped for exactly 1 second. That is all I have. Get it done. I closed the channel. The green light blinked on the console relay. The 57 blue marks began to move, not into a line. And GT snorts. And GT, not into any defensive formation that 800 years of Kreth reference material had ever cataloged. They spread 11 directions, clean and deliberate, like a hand opening from a fist, each small group peeling toward a different section of the enormous red formation, each one moving with purpose, each one carrying exactly as many ships as it needed to be a problem, and not one more. The Kreth advance slowed, not dramatically, not in a way that looked like hesitation from the outside, but I had been studying their formation patterns for 3 weeks, and I knew what their standard advance rate looked like, and this was 9% below it. 9%. They were adjusting their tracking arrays. All 2,300 ships, resolving 11 simultaneous approach vectors into a coherent tactical picture. A process that took time, that cost time, that bled seconds from the margin I was working with. Seconds were what I was spending 57 ships to buy. Nina Cole said very quietly, "Here we go." Yeah, here we go. The first exchange of fire crossed the void between the fleets in the battle that the Council had designated as educational content began. I drank my coffee, already cold. Tuesday. Whiskey Group hit the eastern edge of the Kreth Formation at 4:12 local fleet time. 5 ships against a formation block of 206. The math on that contact produced one clear outcome, and the outcome arrived. In 18 minutes, I watched the 5 whiskey marks disappear from the display. One by one. Each one gone the way a light goes out. When the power finally cuts, immediate. Clean, no gradation. Whiskey Group is gone, Price said. Adjusting. I moved Copper Group into Whiskey's former vector, different angle. Different approach profile, close enough to the previous trajectory that the Kreth's targeting systems would require 7 to 10 seconds to distinguish it from a continuation of Whiskey's attack rather than a new contact. 7 to 10 seconds of recalibration was not a military victory, it was a tax. I intended to collect that tax every single time. Repeat the tax enough and the sum becomes meaningful. Commander Cal Decker had Hammer Group on the rear flank. He was 44 years old. Former Deep Range Survey Corps, carrying the particular self-sufficiency of someone who had spent years making critical decisions in the outer dark, with no one available to second-guess them. I had given him the rear flank because the rear flank required improvisation, and Cal Decker improvised the way most people breathe. He executed the planned maneuver, then he did something I had not planned. A seam opened in the Kreth's rear array, a temporary gap in their coverage as 3 larger vessels adjusted to track Copper Group's new heading. It lasted 40 seconds. Decker drove 2 of his ships through it at full thrust, not to engage the Kreth directly, not to gain ground in any way the scoreboard would reflect. He drove them through because being inside the Kreth perimeter forced the entire rear section to respond to a threat from a direction their formation was not structurally designed to address. The response cost the Kreth 4 minutes of rear section alignment. In 4 minutes, Bolt Group reached the disrupted zone and took out 4 Kreth vessels before the window closed. Bolt lost one of their own in the withdrawal. The exchange rate was terrible by standard metrics. I did not use standard metrics. I used the ones that measured something the standard metrics could not see. I noted the count and moved on. On the Council Observer channel, which had inadvertently looped through my communications board via the relay feed, Cole had been monitoring an open internal transmission. She flagged it at 4:38. Admiral, the Council observers appear to be in disagreement. About what? She read from the translation output. The eldest observer, a 700-year-old member whose species designation I cannot render phonetically, has stated that our tactical disposition makes no logical sense. 2 others are arguing that it does make sense, but that the Council database contains no prior examples of it. 4th has requested a formal categorization hold. I looked up from the display. Categorization hold. They cannot determine what category of engagement to file this under. The classification system has no Existing label for this type of fleet. Behavior. I turn back to my screen, tell them to file it under Tuesday and move on. Should I actually transmit that? No. The relay light blinked green. Price set a fresh coffee on my console. Hot this time. He was tracking more than the tactical display, and I noted it. Without comment, Commander Decker requested permission for a second vector burn through the Kreth midsection. 2 ships at full thrust through the center of a formation block, no direct engagement objective, purely to generate a response and create a gap elsewhere. Indefensible by doctrine, negative. Immediate return by every metric the database used, the kind of move no council species had ever attempted, because it required spending ships for no measurable direct gain. Granted, I said. Decker took the 2 ships through. The Kreth formation shuddered. That was the only word that accurately described it. It moved the way something large and self-assured moves when contacted at an unexpected point. Not damage exactly. Not crisis, but a fractional loss of certainty that moved through the whole structure like a signal through wire. Their central command vessels shifted. Defensive trained immediate, and in shifting they created a corridor through their eastern perimeter that lasted 90 seconds. Ridge Group was already positioned. This was the element no outside observer could easily read. None of the individual moves were random, every group burning in, every ship making a contact that the numbers alone could not justify, was asking the Kreth formation a specific question. How do you respond to this specific pressure at this specific angle? What does this do to your coverage? Where does your attention move when I push? Here. I was not fighting 2,300 ships. I was reading them. Ridge drove through the corridor, 3 Kreth vessels removed from the count. Ridge lost 2 of their own in the pullback. The corridor closed. Price updated the running total. I had 48 ships. The Kreth had 2,290. On the flat numbers, that was a catastrophic ratio. On the numbers I was actually tracking, the ones that required calculation to see, we had moved every single needle. Formation adjustment lag was up 31% from the opening baseline. Targeting recalibration time was up 24%. Cross-sector response window had widened by 47%. The Kreth were faster than us. They remained faster, but they were measurably less fast than they had been 90 minutes ago, and every exchange I forced pushed those numbers further. That was the math I was spending ships to buy. The Council Observer feed has been quiet for 11 minutes, Cole said. No internal discussion. They appear to be watching without commentary. That is better, I said. She glanced at me. Better for whom? I did not answer because Flint Group had just initiated contact on the northern edge, and I needed their response data before I could build the next phase. Flint was running a completely straight approach, no variance, direct vector. The kind of attack that standard doctrine would call suicidal. I needed to see how the Kreth handled a direct frontal contact with this specific fleet, because I did not have that data yet, and I needed it. Flint lasted 38 seconds. 4 ships gone in a single sweep. But the response pattern was clean, readable, and now I had it. The specific data from those 38 seconds would shape the next 2 hours of this engagement in ways that Flint's crew had no way of knowing they were making possible. I logged Flint group gone. Price was quiet for a moment, then you are going to brief the council on all of this afterward. Yes. What will you say? What we did, why it worked, then I will let them figure out what to call it. Somewhere on the Kreth flagship, a commander I would not learn the name of, for another 6 months was receiving status report that contained a word his tactical staff had not used in 800 years of warfare. The word was uncertain. He reportedly read it twice. Then he issued new orders. I did not know this at the time. I found it out later in the formal debrief from his former officers. What I knew, sitting in my command chair, with 48 ships and a hot coffee and 2,290 problems still read on the screen, was that the Kreth advance had slowed another 6% from its already reduced rate. 6%. Do the arithmetic. By the 4th hour, I had 31 ships left. The Kreth had 2,274. Those were the numbers anyone watching the relay could read. I did not look at them that way anymore. I looked at the numbers underneath those numbers, the ones that required calculation to see clearly. Formation adjustment lag, up 42% from the opening baseline. Targeting recalibration time, up 31%. Cross-sector response window, up 58%. The Kreth were responding to each new contact slower than they had responded to the one before it, not dramatically slower, not in a way that changed the fundamental nature of the gap between us, but in measurable, consistent, compounding increments that told a specific story to anyone who knew how to read it. Every time I spent a ship, I bought something with it. I intended to spend each one carefully. Karen Group took the central corridor at hour 4 and 1-2. Commander Helen Ward, 50 years old, former civil engineering corps, which was not a typical background for a fleet combat officer and was exactly why I had wanted her. Engineers looked at structural problems differently from soldiers. They identified load-bearing points, stress, concentrations, the places where a structure was carrying more weight than its design intended. Helen Ward hit the Kreth formations. Load-bearing point at 7, 11, and the response, the specific pattern of how 2,274 ships reacted to pressure at that particular location, gave me the answer to a question I had been building toward for 4 hours. Their formation had a rotation bias. When the Kreth cascade adjusted to a threat on the left flank, the right flank's coverage thinned by a specific and predictable margin, not much but enough, and it lasted exactly 90 seconds before their lateral units rebalanced. 90 seconds. I had been building toward 90 seconds for 4 hours and 32 minutes. Karen Group was gone in 6 minutes. Ward's ship was the last one out. I noted it in the log and moved directly to the next calculation because that was the only way to do this kind of work. I looked at what I had left on the board. Aero Group, Spur Group, Tide Group, 12 ships total, positioned over the past 2 hours in a configuration that looked from the outside like a loose defensive perimeter. It was not a defense, it was the setup for the only move in this entire engagement that was not a question. This one was going to be a statement. Price, I said. Ready. Cole confirmed the relay. Live and active on all 47 frequencies. Admiral. Good, I wanted all 47 frequencies for This next part. Arrow spur tide, I said on the group. Channel, your orders stand, trust your leads, do not wait for confirmation from me on execution, you know the timing. When the window opens, go. Short acknowledgements came back, clean. No extra words. Arrow group hit the Creth's left flank. At full thrust, committing all 4 ships to a contact they could not withdraw from cleanly. The Creth left flank responded in 7 seconds, rapid. Trained the same response pattern I had cataloged and mapped across 4 hours of contact. The left flank folded inward to address the threat. The right flank thinned. 90 seconds. Spur group drove into the thinning coverage on the right at the 42nd mark. 3 ships tight formation. Straight line to the coordination node. In the Creth's right flank command cluster. They did not need to destroy the node. They needed to reach it, force it to relocate and cost the Creth's right flank coordination 15 to 20 seconds of reconfiguration time while the node reset its position. They reached it in 58 seconds. They cost the Creth 19 seconds of coordination. In those 19 seconds, Tide Group went deeper. 5 ships, my last intact reserve group. Besides Tuesday, Commander Grace Nolan, 38 years old, former long-range reconnaissance, the most patient officer I had worked with in 14 years of doing this job. She had been holding Tide Group at a seemingly unremarkable position off the Creth formation's outer edge for 6 hours, doing nothing that would draw attention or suggest importance. Waiting. Grace Nolan drove 5 ships through the gap and reached the inner formation in 72 seconds. The inner formation. Inside the cascade. Inside the 2,274 ships. Inside the architecture that had ended 12 civilizations that the Council database described as effectively impenetrable to any fleet smaller than a force multiplier of 1.4. The Creth responded with everything that an 800-year-old military machine responds with when it finds an enemy inside its own perimeter. Arrow Group was gone in 4 minutes. Spur Group lasted 6. Tide Group lasted 9. I noted each one in the log. I sat with the entry for Tide Group. Moment longer than the others, not a long moment long enough. The communications board signaled an incoming fragment. Not a live transmission, a loop, an automated repeater cycling from a ship that was no longer transmitting by choice. The ID code resolved Cairn Group Helen Ward's ship. The loop had been running for 40 minutes, which meant it had been cycling since Ward's ship was hit, and I had not caught it because I had been watching other sectors. It was 17 seconds long. I listened to the first 2 seconds. Ward's voice mid-sentence, the particular calm that people find when they have accepted what the next few minutes are going to look like. She was telling someone on her crew, I never found out who, that they had done what they came to do. I cut the feed. I did not need the other 15 seconds. I already had everything she had said. On the council relay, the green light kept its patient blinking. Cole turned from her board. Her voice was steady in the way that cost something to maintain across a long shift. The council observer feed has been silent for 47 minutes. Admiral, the eldest observer, transmitted one line 14 minutes ago. Translation reads, they are not trying to win. I looked up from the display. That was his observation. Yes, his aide followed, asking what we We're trying to do. Cole paused. There's record of a response. I looked at the screen. 23 ships, my 23. Tuesday group plus the 3 from Ridge. That had pulled back intact 6 hours ago, and what was left of copper. The Kreth had 2,261. Formation adjustment lag was now 71%. Above opening baseline. Cross-sector response window, 104%. Above baseline. The Kreth were twice as slow to respond to anything as they had been when this engagement opened, not slow in any absolute sense. Still faster than us, still larger than us, still holding a formation that dwarfed everything I had left by a ratio. That made the math look like a mistake. But they were half the machine they had been 14 hours ago, and they had no framework in 800 years of military experience to explain why a fleet that should have been eliminated 6 hours ago was still making them adjust. I opened the Tuesday channel. Price, new formation breakdown, 23. Ships, one more move. He pulled up the layout I had been building in my head since hour 6. He was quiet for a moment. This is not in any manual. No, I do not have a name for it. It does not need one. He looked at it another moment. It should not work. The arithmetic says it might. The arithmetic on this is extremely uncertain, Admiral. That is the most accurate thing you have said all day. Something crossed his face that was not quite a smile, close enough to be worth something. All units, this is Voss, I said on the fleet channel. One more run. Hold your heading until you hear otherwise. Trust the math. I set the formation. 23 ships. One more question. The maneuver had no name because no one had ever attempted it. I'd been working through the theory of it in my head for 18 hours, refining every variable against what the past 9 hours had taught me about how the Kreth formation moved and responded to specific types of pressure. It was not a tactic in the conventional sense. It was closer to a mathematical proof, one that used ships as variables and the Kreth formation's own condition responses as the working mechanism. The premise, a cascade formation, carrying a 90-second rotation bias, 71% degraded adjustment response, and 800 years of conditioning toward expected enemy behavior will produce specific structural gap if presented with simultaneous pressure at 3 non-adjacent points within a precise 4-second in timing window. Hitting all 3 points within 4 seconds required 3 separate formations acting without communication during execution because the communication lag would throw the timing. It required trusting 23 crew commanders to hit their marks without checking in. I trusted them. I split the 23 ships into 3 formations. 788 lead. Command of the first went to Price. The second went to Cole, who had never commanded a combat formation before this day and to whom I was giving 8 ships because she had spent 9 hours understanding this engagement better than anyone alive, and she was ready. The third I kept. Price, I said. Ready. Cole. Ready, Admiral, completely steady, not the steadiness of someone pretending. The steadiness of someone who had made their decision before I asked. You know your vectors, you know the timing window. Do not wait for my signal. If you wait for my signal, the window closes. When your count reaches 0, you go. Understood. Good. I looked at the 2,261 red marks on the screen one last time. The formation that had ended 12 civilizations sitting there patient and massive and absolutely certain of its own conclusion. Go do the arithmetic. The 3 formations split. On the council relay, 47 species watched. 23 ships divide into 3 groups and begin moving in 3 separate directions away from each other. Away from the Kreth formation, away, which to any observer reading standard doctrine looked like a fragmentation, breakdown of command cohesion, the final dissolution of a fleet that had run out of options. The council's eldest observer transmitted one line to his open feed. Cole read it without being asked. He says they are separating, the engagement is concluding. Good, let him think that. The 23 ships reached their preliminary positions. The Kreth formation, responding to what appeared to be the final collapse of our fleet structure, began consolidating, drawing inward, preparing for a closing sweep. This was standard cascade conclusion behavior. This was what they had done 43 times before when the enemy broke you. Collected the pieces. This was the last assumption I needed them to make. The formation pulled inward. The rotation bias triggered. Left flank folded in. Right flank thinned. 3 seconds. 2. 1. Price's 7 ships dropped into full burn on the precise curve I had calculated for the thinning on the right flank. Not a straight line but a specific arc, following the exact trajectory that the Kreth's response pattern, as I had read it across 9 hours of contact, would leave open for 11 seconds. 8 seconds after Price's group moved, Cole drove her 8 ships into the Kreth formation's central command node. Approach vector not to hit the node, to make the node believe it was about to be hit, which was a different thing entirely. A thing that would cost the Kreth central command 3 specific seconds of defensive reorientation. 3 seconds after Cole initiated, I took Tuesday's 8 ships at full thrust into the gap that Price's approach had generated along the right flank's inner edge. Full thrust. The display showed the gap at 34 km wide and narrowing at a rate that would close it in under a minute. Tuesday went through at the bearing I had been refining for 18 hours, the one I had not communicated to anyone outside my own head because there was no time and no point, because if I was wrong about it then no communication would help, and if I was right about it then the results would communicate better than I could. Inside the cascade, for the first time in this engagement, and possibly for the first time in recorded interstellar history, functioning fleet was inside the cascade formation. The Kreth responded with everything they had. Of course they did. An 800-year-old military machine responds to internal threats with speed and coordinated force, but they responded differently to threats inside their perimeter than to those outside it, because their formation was not architecturally designed to be addressed from within, and the 71% degraded response lag that 9 hours of contact had built into their system meant the internal response came fractionally, measurably, decisively late. Price's group held the right flank gap for 40 seconds. Cole's group forced the central command node into a 42-second defensive posture. In those 40 seconds, Tuesday's 8 ships reached the cascade's coordination spine. The coordination spine was not a single ship or a single point, it was a distributed command lattice running through the formation's interior, linking every sector's response systems into one coherent whole. You could not destroy it, it was too distributed for targeted destruction, but you could disrupt it if you hit enough nodes in a precise enough sequence within a short enough window. You could force the lattice to do something it was not designed to do. Reset. A coordination spine reset in the Kreth Cascade formation takes 4 minutes and 17 seconds. This was in the Council database, listed as a theoretical vulnerability, then immediately dismissed because no fleet in 800 years of engagements had ever reached a position to trigger it. I hit 7 nodes in 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Then the Kreth closed the gap around Tuesday. 4 ships, my command ship and 3 others. The rest of Tuesday was gone. The coordination spine reset. For 4 minutes and 17 seconds, the Kreth Cascade formation, all 2,261 ships, 800 years of operational history. The thing that had ended 12 civilizations ran on individual sector command authority with no central coordination linking the sectors together. Individual sector authority means every section of the formation makes its own decisions independently, and the decision that every section made independently without central instruction in those 4 minutes and 17 seconds was the same. Stop. Not retreat, not regroup, not pursue. Stop. 2,261 ships stopped. The Council relay went dark for 3 seconds, not technically dark. The signal remained live, but every feed on every frequency went silent simultaneously, the way all sound leaves a room when something occurs that no one present has words for yet. The feeds came back. The Council chamber was silent. The eldest observer's feed showed a single still image. He was not transmitting, he was not speaking to his aide, he was simply looking at the tactical display showing 2,261 red marks in a configuration that had never appeared in the Galactic database before. Stopped. Cole was the first person on my bridge to speak. Her voice was different then. It had been 9 hours ago, carrying something she did not name and did not need to. Admiral, they are holding position. All sectors, no advance, no withdrawal. She paused. I have a transmission from the Kreth flagship. Play it. The Kreth language came through as tonal harmonics resolving into approximate meaning. The translator flagged 43% accuracy on the literal content, which was low. The emotional register came back high confidence. A single word recognition. The Kreth commander had looked at what remained of my fleet, 4 ships with one showing significant structural damage on every scan, and had stopped 2,261 ships. Not because we had won, not by any metric the scoreboard tracked. He stopped because the thing in front of him was not in his reference material. He had encountered for the first time in 800 years an enemy that got smaller and more focused as it was reduced. An enemy that had spent its ships the way an engineer spends structural variables deliberately, with calculation, working towards something whose shape he could recognize but not name. He had asked his tactical staff to identify the strategy I was using. His tactical staff produced 17 analyses, All 17 were different. None of them were wrong, none of them were complete, because what I was doing had no entry in the database, and the reason it had no entry was that it required something the database had not previously encountered. In a military context, something that did not translate cleanly into tactical language. It required not stopping. It required treating loss as a variable rather than a conclusion. It required the particular arithmetic of a species that had been working through hard problems on a difficult planet for 200,000 years and had never once found a way around Tuesday. On the council relay, 47 species had gone very quiet. The eldest observer finally transmitted. His feed showed him turning slowly toward his aide. The translation of what he said was imperfect but clear enough. He said, "I think they do this all the time." His aide did not respond. The Kreth flagship transmitted again. The translator's emotional register output came back in 3 words. Respect, offer, alliance. The engagement ended without a formal closing exchange. The Kreth fleet held position for 6 hours, no advance, no withdrawal, no further transmission. 2261. Ships sitting in the void, which is not something any fleet does unless it is either broken or thinking very hard about something. They were thinking. I used the 6 hours to compile the tactical report, conduct a preliminary crew count, and drink 3 more coffees. Owen Price slept for 90 minutes with his head resting on his arm at his console, and I left him alone because he had earned it and because I was not going to sleep until the numbers were in order. Nina Cole did not sleep. She stayed at the communications board and transcribed every council observer transmission captured over the course of the engagement. 14 hours of feed organized and annotated by the time I asked for it. She had flagged the most significant exchanges with brief summary notes in her own words. Every note was accurate. I had 4 ships left. Price put the full fleet count in front of me when he woke up. 53 ships gone in 14 hours. I sat with that number in the same deliberate flat way I had sat with all the other numbers during the engagement, not because I did not understand what it meant, because understanding it fully was something to do later when there was time and a door and a room where no one needed me to be Admiral Voss for an hour or 2. Right now they needed me to be Admiral Voss. The formal council summons arrived at 1847, 6 hours and 22 minutes after the Kreth fleet stopped. A request for an emergency observer session. The language was measured and careful, using words like extraordinary and unprecedented, and the phrase immediate consultation is respectfully requested. I approved it. The Kreth formal envoy transmission arrived 3 minutes later, much shorter. Their language resolved into something that translated roughly as, "We would prefer to continue this conversation." A different format. The emotional register was still flagged as respect. The translator added a supplementary note classifying a secondary register after running it through 6 interpretation models as something close to relief. I read that part twice. Then I sent my formal acknowledgement and went to find a uniform that was not showing 14 hours of command chair. The council chamber was a relay presentation. No human vessel had ever attended a full council session physically, and the Representative technology remained in development. I appeared to the chamber as a blue-edged holographic image in the center of their space. I had been informed of this beforehand. I thought it was fine. Blue-edged and three-dimensional was exactly how I felt. The presiding speaker opened with a formal address acknowledging the engagement. They used phrases like remarkable resilience and significant tactical achievement and humanities, demonstrable commitment to the defense of its interests. I let them finish. Then I asked to speak. What you observed was not a remarkable achievement, I said. It was a standard engagement response under the specific conditions presented. I would not want the council to file it as exceptional, because that framing would produce the wrong conclusions about what you were watching and what it means going forward. Silence in the chamber. The translator drones relayed my words in real time to 47 species. The presiding speaker carefully, what were we watching, Admiral? You were watching Tuesday, I said. The translator flagged this as requiring context. You were watching what happens when you back something into a corner that does not experience corners the way you expect, I said. That is not a special event for us. That is the standard setting. I would recommend the council update its database accordingly, because the next time you observe a human fleet in a comparable situation, the response will look very similar. Silence again. The diplomatic staff had told me in my briefing before this session that sustained silences in the council chamber were rare and carried significant meaning. I did not know how to read the precise nature of the meaning. I had been awake for 22 hours and I was not at my best for reading subtle cultural signals across 47 different species simultaneously. I continued anyway. I want to submit a full tactical record to the council database, not because of what it reveals about us, because of what it reveals about the Kreth Cascade formation. There are structural vulnerabilities in that formation that every council member should have documented access to if another civilization encounters it, and we have the information that could help them. Withholding it serves no one. The presiding speaker was quiet for a moment. You are offering intelligence on the Kreth formation after the Kreth have extended a formal offer of alliance. Yes, the alliance is between us and the Kreth. That is a bilateral matter. The formation intelligence is operationally relevant to anyone who might face it. Those are two separate things, and I do not see a conflict between them. Somewhere in the chamber, the eldest observer transmitted a brief sound that the translator classified as amusement. Not mockery, the other kind, the kind that comes from recognizing something you have not encountered in a very long time. The session continued for another 2 hours. The council had questions, which was expected after 14 hours of footage that had broken their classification system. I answered them directly. When they asked about tactical intent, I explained it. When they asked about loss count, I gave the number without framing. When they asked about the coordination spine approach, I walked through the mathematics step by step. An ambassador from one of the smaller council member species, a thoughtful individual who asked precise questions and listened to the full answer before forming the next one, said, Admiral, what does humanity intend to do now with the council's recognition, with the Kreth Alliance offer, with the position this engagement has created? I looked at the chamber around me, at the 47 represented species and the tactical display still showing the engagement record still showing the moment when 2261 ship stopped. I thought about Price's sleep on his console surface. I thought about Cole staying at her board for 14 hours without complaint, annotating every transmission. I thought about Grace Nolan and Helen Ward and Cal Decker and every other name in the log. Do the arithmetic, I said, and then get back to work. The ambassador waited a moment. That is all. That is all. The Kreth envoy meeting was the following morning. The Kreth envoy vessel came to a neutral point 300 km from my command ship, and we conducted the session via direct link. No relay translation drones. The Kreth had invested in translation technology early in their development, and their system rendered both languages in real time at 91% accuracy, which was better than the Council's translator had managed. The Kreth envoy's title translated as something close to commitment. He was the highest-ranked diplomatic officer they had available, which told me something about how they were approaching this. He opened with a formal statement of acknowledgement in Kreth diplomatic language. The briefing document explained this was a significant gesture acknowledging an engagement outcome that did not favor you, required a specific ritual phrasing that signaled genuine intent rather than tactical positioning. It was a costly gesture in their culture, in the sense that it was not easily reversed. Their translation system rendered his acknowledgement as, we see what happened and we say it clearly. I appreciated the directness. I want to ask you something, I said, which apparently was not the expected next step in the Kreth diplomatic protocol. The envoy paused, then he indicated for me to continue. Your commander stopped, I said, not retreated, not regrouped, stopped. I want to understand what that decision was. The envoy was quiet for 11 seconds. The commander identified something. He said something that the formation models could not account for. What did he identify? Another pause. The translation system flagged the next phrase as requiring cultural context to render accurately. He identified that you had decided. The envoy said, in 800 years we have not encountered an enemy that had fully decided before the engagement began. Most enemies decide at the start. When they begin to lose, the decision softens. They begin looking for alternatives, withdrawal, negotiation, delay. He paused. You did not look for alternatives. I sat with that for a moment. No, I said, I did not. The commander did not know how to continue an engagement against something that was not looking for an alternative. He could not identify where it ended. The envoy looked at me through the link. In 800 years, he had never needed to. No. I did not say anything immediately. Your fleet, the envoy said carefully. The ships you lost. 53. We would like to, he paused. There is a Kreth practice for engagements where the opposing force demonstrates the quality your commander identified. There is a specific form of acknowledgement. What kind? We record them, their designations, their commanders' names in a specific register. The translation of what we call that register is not clean in your language, something close to those who did not stop. I looked at him through the link. I will send you the full crew Manifest, I said, all 53 ships every name. We will record all of them. I appreciate that. The meeting continued for another 3 hours. Alliance structure, geographic boundaries, communication protocols, the joint database sharing agreements that would take 6 months to draft properly and another year to ratify, all of it. Important, all of it something that the diplomats were going to do most of the actual work on. I did my portion and handed it over to the people who were built for that kind of work. On the way back to my command ship, Price fell into step beside me. How did it go? Fine. The Alliance terms. Reasonable, better than I expected. Honestly, I paused. They want the crew. Manifest full list. They are going to record them in a register. Price was quiet for a moment. What kind of register? Something close to memorial, there. Translation did not have an exact equivalent, something like those who did not stop. He walked beside me without speaking for a while. The corridor was quiet outside. The viewport at the corridor's end, the void, was the same void it had always been. Enormous, patient, completely indifferent. Good, Price said finally. Yes. Back on the command deck, Cole had completed the full transmission. Transcription from the engagement. At the bottom, she had written a summary note, unprompted, which was the kind of initiative that meant in 10 years she was going to be very good at whatever job she decided she wanted. The note read, "The Council Observer feed shows that the eldest observer did not transmit again after the engagement ended. His personal log was shared with the relay by automatic archival protocol. The log contains one entry, dated 14 hours after the engagement concluded. The entry has not been formally released to the public record. Translation accuracy is rated at 87%. I read the translation. 7 words. The eldest observer had written in his private log, apparently not intending the entry to reach anyone else. I had forgotten what surviving looked like. I read it twice. Then I placed it in the supplemental notes section of the tactical record, where it would stay as long as the record stayed. Owen Price was already at his console, working through the resupply request for the 4 remaining ships. He had the forms pulled up and half completed. He had not waited to be asked. Nina Cole was cross-referencing the Creth database share against our existing records, flagging discrepancies for the Joint Committee, working methodically from the top of the list. Outside, the void was still there, still enormous, still full of things that had not happened yet. I pulled up a new document. At the top I wrote, "Resupply. Requisition Tuesday, Group 4. Vessels." Then I wrote the names. Then I got back to work.